My name is Noelle Whitman, and I'm now 42 years old. For most of my life, I was the quiet gear in my family's machine, the one who made things run smoothly in the background without ever being acknowledged as essential. My family runs Whitman Imports, a business started by my grandfather, and for years, I served as its in-house translator, its bridge to the world. I never expected that the single most important meeting in our company's history, a meeting I was deliberately excluded from, would become the stage for my quiet rebellion. My own father and brother tried to silence me, but in doing so, they handed me the microphone at the exact moment the world needed to hear my voice. Before I tell you how a single, disastrously translated sentence nearly bankrupted us, and how I saved everything by doing the one thing they told me not to, I'd love to know where you're all watching from today. Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever felt underestimated by the people who should believe in you most, go ahead and hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed to join our community of storytellers. It means the world to me. The story of my invisibility began, as these things often do, in the quiet, unspoken rules of childhood. Our family had a very clear narrative. My father, Arthur Whitman, was the patriarch, a man cast from the old-school mold of business, where handshakes were firm and sons followed in father's footsteps. My older brother, Leo, was the heir apparent from the moment he was born. He was the golden child, not because he was malicious, but because the path was paved for him with gold bricks. I was the daughter, the epilogue to the main story. My role was to be supportive, useful, and above all, not to take up too much space. I remember one Christmas when I was about 9 and Leo was 12. Under the tree were 2 large, impressively wrapped boxes. Leo's contained a magnificent antique-style globe, the kind you'd see in a CEO's office. With it was a small, engraved brass plaque that read, "Leo Whitman, future CEO." My father beamed with pride as Leo traced the trade routes with his finger. My box was smaller. Inside was a collection of language-learning cassette tapes, French, Spanish, and Japanese, and a set of flashcards. My father patted my head. "That's a useful hobby, Noelle," he'd said. "A girl who can speak a few languages is a great asset to her husband and his business someday." The implication was clear. Leo's destiny was to own the globe. Mine was to learn the words of the people on it, to facilitate his journey, not to embark on my own. This pattern solidified as we grew older. Leo was sent to expensive summer camps focused on young entrepreneurs and business leadership. He'd come home talking about supply chains and market caps. His education was an investment. My passions were treated as charming but frivolous expenditures. I fell in love with Japanese in particular. The intricate dance of its grammar, the layers of respect woven into its honorifics, it was a beautiful, complex world I wanted to inhabit. I begged to go on a summer immersion program in Japan when I was 16. My father called it an expensive vacation. He told me if I wanted to go, I'd have to pay for it myself. So I did. I worked every weekend and after school for a year at a local bookstore, saving every dollar. The trip was transformative. It wasn't a vacation. It was the beginning of my life's work. But when I came back, bubbling with stories and a newfound confidence in my speaking, my family's reaction was lukewarm. "That's nice, dear," my mother said. Leo just asked if I'd brought him back any cool video games. My achievement was framed as a personal indulgence, while his summer spent learning to play golf with junior executives was a crucial career move. The disparity continued into our university years. The company paid for Leo's prestigious business administration degree without a second thought. When I declared my major in linguistics and East Asian studies, my father's sigh was audible over the phone. "What are you going to do with that, Noelle?" "Teach," he'd asked, the disappointment clear in his voice. "It's not practical." I tried to explain that understanding culture and language was the future of global business, that our import company could expand exponentially if we could truly connect with our partners. He didn't see it. To him, business was numbers, contracts, and handshakes. The rest was just fluff. I ended up securing a mix of scholarships and taking out loans to cover what my parents were unwilling to, feeling a sense of shame that my education was considered less worthy. There was another family trip, that seared this dynamic into my memory. We went to Italy when I was 19. My father had been trying to secure a small deal with a boutique leather artisan in Florence, but the negotiations had stalled over email. We were there on a family vacation, but he decided to try and meet the artisan in person. The man, Signor Rossi, spoke no English. My father and Leo, armed with a phrasebook and supreme confidence, tried to communicate. It was a disaster. They were loud, their gestures were misunderstood, and their attempts at Italian were borderline insulting. After 10 minutes of excruciatingly awkward conversation, Signor Rossi was ready to show them the door. I had been standing silently in the corner, as instructed, but I couldn't bear to watch it fail. I had studied Italian for 2 years in college. Hesitantly, I stepped forward and addressed the artisan in his own language. I apologized for the misunderstanding and explained what my father was trying to convey, but with the proper respect and politeness. Signor Rossi's entire demeanor changed. He broke into a warm smile, and the two of us conversed for the next half hour. We secured the deal. On the way back to the hotel, I was buzzing with pride. My father turned to me and said, "Well, look at that. Your little hobby came in handy for once." Leo just laughed and said I'd make a great tour guide. My skill hadn't made them see me as a peer. It had just been a convenient party trick. I hadn't earned a seat at the table. I just helped them get a better deal on the table centerpiece. The only person who ever saw the world in me, not just the words, was a woman I met during that self-funded trip to Kyoto. Her name was Keiko Sato. I was part of a student exchange program, and she was a volunteer cultural mentor for the foreign students. She was in her late 50s then, a retired executive from a tech company, though she never spoke much about her past career. She was elegance personified, poised, sharp-witted, with a serene smile that hid a formidable intellect. While my host family was kind, I felt adrift in the subtleties of Japanese culture, constantly afraid of causing offense. Keiko-san took me under her wing. Our weekly meetings over tea in a quiet garden became the anchor of my time there. She taught me more than just vocabulary and grammar. She taught me the soul of the language. She explained Han and Tate May, the contrast between one's true feelings and the public facade. She taught me how silence could be a form of communication, how the depth of a bow conveyed a whole chapter of meaning. We practiced Kigo, the formal, honorific language, for hours. She was a patient but demanding teacher. "It is not enough to speak Japanese, Noel-san," she would say, her voice gentle but firm. "You must learn to think in Japanese, to feel the weight of the words." One afternoon, I was frustrated. I'd made a clumsy mistake while talking to my host mother, using a casual form of a word when I should have been more formal, and she had become visibly distant. I was complaining to Keiko-san, feeling like a failure. "I'll never get it right," I lamented. "I don't belong here." Keiko-san simply refilled my teacup. "You are trying to build a bridge, Noel-san. You have laid the foundation and the pillars, but you are afraid to walk across it. Language is a key, but you must have the courage to turn it in the lock. Your voice has value only when you choose to use it." Her words struck me with the force of a physical blow. She saw my potential, but she also saw my fear, the fear that had been instilled in me for years, the fear of taking up space. We had one small crisis together that proved her point. We were visiting a small, remote temple in the mountains outside Kyoto. On our way back to the bus stop, we discovered we had taken a wrong turn. The sun was setting, the signs were old and faded, and my phone had no signal. I started to panic, my mind going blank. Keiko-san remained perfectly calm. She looked at me. "Now, Noel-san, you must be the bridge." She pointed to a small farmhouse in the distance. My heart pounded. She was testing me. I had to walk up to that door, a stranger, a foreigner, and ask for help, using the polite, respectful language she had drilled into me. I was terrified, but her steady gaze gave me strength. I took a deep breath, walked to the house, and did it. The elderly couple who lived there were wary at first, but my formal, humble apology for disturbing them and my careful phrasing won them over. Not only did they point us in the right direction, they insisted on driving us to the station themselves. In the car, Keiko-san placed a hand on my arm. You see? You did not just ask for directions. You showed respect. You built a connection. That is the true power. We lost touch after I returned to the States. I sent her letters for a year or two, but they eventually went unanswered, and I assumed she had moved. But her lessons and her belief in me became a secret, protected part of my identity. Fast forward 20 years. I was now 40, and my role at Whitman Imports was firmly, if unofficially, defined. I was the Director of Communications, a title my father had given me that sounded important but carried little real authority. In practice, I was the company's linguistic Swiss Army knife. I translated contracts, smoothed over communications with our European partners, and handled any international client who didn't speak English. I was good at my job. I was meticulous, culturally sensitive, and my work had saved the company from countless misunderstandings and bad deals. But I was still the helpful daughter. My salary was a fraction of Leo's, who was now vice president, and I was never included in the major strategic decisions. Then came the Tanaka deal. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. The Tanaka Corporation was a titan of Japanese luxury goods, artisanal textiles, ceramics, and lacquerware with a history stretching back centuries. They were looking for an exclusive North American partner to manage their expansion. Landing this deal would elevate Whitman Imports from a mid-tier family business to a major player on the international stage. It was a legacy-defining moment. And it was my moment to shine. My Japanese was not just fluent, it was my second soul. I understood the culture, the etiquette, the business philosophy. For weeks, I threw myself into preparations. I compiled a massive dossier on the Tanaka Corporation, their history, their key executives. I prepared a detailed cultural briefing for our team, outlining everything from the proper way to exchange business cards to the subtle negotiation tactics we could expect. I wrote draft after draft of introductory emails, perfecting every nuance. I was ready. I was more than ready. I was indispensable. A week before the first video conference with the Tanaka team, I called a meeting with my father and Leo. I laid out my preparation binders on the polished surface of the boardroom table, the same table where I was never given a permanent seat. I've put together a comprehensive strategy for our communications. I began, my voice filled with an eager confidence I rarely showed them. I've analyzed their corporate messaging, and I think I have a real handle on the tone we need to strike. My father picked up one of the binders, flipping through it with a dismissive air. This is good, Noel. Very thorough. He placed it back on the table. You can handle the preliminary emails, get things started. My heart sank. Preliminary emails? Dad, I can do more than that. I should be on the calls. I should be in the meetings. I'm the only one who speaks the language. Leo leaned back in his chair, a look of patronizing pity on his face. It was the look he always gave me when he thought I was being emotional or naive. Noel, this isn't some small deal with a Florentine craftsman. This is the big leagues. We need a professional translator. Someone with a corporate merger pedigree. It's about perception. I am a professional. I retorted, my voice rising. My degree, my 20 years of experience here, what do you think that is? I understand the cultural nuances in a way no hired gun ever will. The way you phrase a no in Japanese business can be more important than a yes. You can't just translate that. You have to understand it. Then came the blow. We've already retained someone, Arthur said flatly, not meeting my eyes. A Mr. Peterson from Global Bridge Translators. They're top of the line. Very prestigious. My breath caught in my throat. They had gone behind my back. They had hired a stranger to do my job, the most important job of my career. Why? The word came out as a wounded whisper. Because we need to show the Tanakas we're serious, my father said, his tone final. That we spare no expense. Hiring a firm like Global Bridge sends a message. The message it sent to me was deafeningly clear. You are not enough. My expertise wasn't a valuable asset. It was a cheap, in-house alternative they were embarrassed to use on the big stage. I felt the floor drop out from beneath me. It was Christmas morning all over again. I was the girl with the flashcards, while Leo was the CEO with the globe. The pain was so sharp, so visceral. It felt like a physical betrayal. "So, what am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and hurt. "You can sit in on the main meeting, of course," Leo said, as if granting a great favor. "Take notes. Make sure the coffee is hot. You know." He meant it to be placating, but it was the most profound insult he could have possibly delivered. I was being relegated to a secretarial role, a hostess. After everything I had done for this company, for this family, I was being told to sit at a side table and be quiet. The humiliation burned in my chest, a cold, hard knot of resentment. I just nodded, unable to speak, and walked out of the room before they could see the tears welling in my eyes. The weeks that followed were a slow, grinding torture of being proven right and utterly ignored. Mr. Peterson, the prestigious translator, was CC'd on the initial email chains between Leo and Mr. Tanaka's executive assistant. I was included as a courtesy, a ghost in the machine. As soon as I read Peterson's first translation, a cold dread washed over me. It was technically correct, in the way a computer program might translate a sentence. The words were there, but the soul was gone. His Japanese was blunt, overly direct, and stripped of the essential layers of politeness and deference. It was the Japanese of a textbook, not of a high-stakes business negotiation. He used the pronoun anata for you, a word that can be considered intimate or even condescending in a formal context, instead of using the person's name and title. It was a rookie mistake, a glaring sign of cultural tone deafness. I printed out the email chain, took a red pen, and circled the awkward phrases, writing notes in the margins explaining the subtle implications. I walked into Leo's office, my heart pounding with a desperate need to make him understand. "Leo, you have to see this," I said, laying the papers on his desk. "This translation, it's aggressive. You're not coming across as a respectful potential partner. You're coming across as a demanding American who can't be bothered to learn their ways. This phrase here," I pointed, "it reads like a command, not a request." Leo glanced at my notes, a smirk playing on his lips. "Noel, the man works for Global Bridge Translators. They're the best in the business. I think they know what they're doing." He pushed the papers back toward me. "Look, I get it. You're upset you didn't get the gig. But don't let it make you petty. You're second-guessing a world-class expert." The gaslighting was so blatant, so dismissive. It took my breath away. My valid, expert critique was being framed as feminine jealousy. He didn't see my concern for the company. He only saw his little sister having a tantrum. I was invisible again. My expertise was nothing against the prestige of a brand name he had paid for. A few days later, a reply came from Mr. Tanaka's assistant. The Japanese was exquisitely polite, almost poetically so, but I could read the subtext. The warmth from the very first communication was gone. The language was cooler, more formal, creating a subtle distance. It was a yellow flag, a warning shot fired with the utmost grace. I pointed it out to my father. "Dad, do you see the shift in tone here? They're putting up a wall." He read the English translation Peterson had provided, which, of course, captured none of the nuance. "It looks fine to me, Noel," he said, patting my shoulder. They replied, didn't they? "Stop worrying so much. Let the men handle it. Let the men handle it." The words echoed in my head for days. I was a Cassandra, cursed to see the future, but never to be believed. The day before the final in-person meeting, the air in the office was thick with a nervous, frantic energy. The Tanaka delegation was flying in that evening. Mr. Kenji Tanaka, the CEO himself, two of his top executives, and his wife, Mrs. Emi Tanaka. The inclusion of his wife was a significant gesture, a sign that he viewed this as a relationship, a joining of families, not just a cold transaction. My father and Leo, however, saw her as little more than a plus one. "Make sure there are some magazines for her to read in the waiting area, Noel." My father had instructed me that morning, as if she were a patient at a dentist's office. Meanwhile, I was tasked with overseeing the meeting room preparations. I wasn't reviewing the final contract points. I was checking the HDMI cables for the projector, arranging notepads and pens, and confirming the catering order. I felt like an event planner for my own execution. In a last-ditch effort, I spent 2 hours that afternoon creating a simple, one-page guide titled Key Phrases and Cultural Etiquette for Our Japanese Guests. It was a cheat sheet, a desperate attempt to inject some of my knowledge into the room. It included simple things: how to present a business card with 2 hands, the importance of not pouring your own drink, and a few simple, respectful Japanese phrases of greeting and gratitude. I found my father in his office, reviewing spreadsheets. I handed him the guide. "Dad, just in case," I said, my voice small. "Little things like this can make a big difference. It shows respect." He took the sheet, glanced at it for less than a second, and set it on the corner of his desk, where it was promptly covered by another file. "Thank you, dear. Very thoughtful." He didn't even look at me. "Now, did you confirm they're delivering the special sencha green tea? The expensive kind Mr. Tanaka is said to enjoy. We can't be serving them the cheap stuff from the break room." My intellectual property, my years of study, distilled into a single, helpful page, was worth less to him than the brand of tea we served. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, a profound sense of despair washing over me. Maybe they're right, a voice in my head whispered. Maybe I am just a hobbyist. Maybe I'm making a big deal out of nothing. Maybe I'm not cut out for this world. I felt like an imposter in my own life. I thought of Keiko-san, of her steady voice telling me I had to have the courage to turn the key. It felt like a lifetime ago, a lesson taught to a different, more hopeful version of myself. The woman I was now was just a daughter, an employee, a note-taker waiting in the wings. The morning of the meeting arrived, gray and overcast, mirroring my mood. The main conference room on the top floor of our building was prepared like a stage for a royal ceremony. The long mahogany table was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the grim Chicago skyline. On one side sat the Whitman contingent, my father, looking stern and important at the head of the table, Leo, looking nervous but trying to project an air of command, and 2 of our senior legal counsels. On the other side sat the Tanaka delegation. Mr. Kenji Tanaka was an imposing man in his late 60s, with a sharp, intelligent gaze and an aura of immense authority. He was flanked by his 2 executives, both silent and watchful. And next to him sat his wife, Emi Tanaka. I was at my assigned post, a small, round table in the corner of the room, behind my father's chair. I was literally marginalized, an afterthought in the architecture of the room. On my table was a notepad, a pen, and a large carafe of iced water for the sole purpose of refilling glasses. Mr. Peterson, the hired gun, sat proudly next to Leo, his briefcase open, looking smug and confident. He was a portly American man in an expensive but ill-fitting suit, a caricature of the expert my family had paid for. My eyes kept drifting to Mrs. Tanaka. She was the picture of quiet grace, dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored silk suit. Her posture was perfect, her hands rested calmly in her lap. She sat with a serene, almost unreadable expression, her eyes taking in everything. There was something about her, a flicker of familiarity in her poise, in the way she held her head. But I dismissed it. It was impossible. The name was wrong. The context was a universe away from a student mentorship program in Kyoto. I was just projecting my memories onto a stranger. The meeting began. The introductions were stiff and awkward. Mr. Peterson's translations were just as I had feared, loud, clunky, and devoid of grace. He stumbled over the Japanese executives' names. I saw a subtle, almost imperceptible wince from one of them. My father and Leo, of course, noticed nothing. They launched into their pitch, their words filtered through Peterson's clumsy linguistic sieve. I sat in my corner, clenching my pen, feeling every mistranslation like a physical blow. The room grew colder with every word he spoke. We were 2 hours into the tense negotiation when we arrived at the crux of the deal, Article 7, the section on brand stewardship and intellectual property. This was the most sensitive clause. The Tanaka Corporation was entrusting us with a legacy that was hundreds of years old. Their concern was not just about profits. It was about preserving the wabi-sabi ethos of their brand, the aesthetic of imperfect, transient beauty. My father, wanting to sound decisive and strong, leaned forward. "I want to assure you," he said, his voice booming in the quiet room, "that Whitman Imports is fully committed to this partnership. We will be dedicated partners in preserving the legacy of the Tanaka brand." It was a good statement, a solid, respectable, good faith sentiment. In English, Mr. Peterson cleared his throat, ready for his moment. He turned to Mr. Tanaka and began to translate. My blood ran cold as I heard the words leave his mouth. He was speaking quickly, confidently, completely unaware of the bomb he was about to detonate. To convey the idea of preserving a legacy, a careful translator would use a phrase like Dento o Mamori Tsuzukaru to continue protecting a tradition, or Sunkei o Matyukisuru to inherit with respect. These phrases are humble, showing deference to the weight of their history. Peterson, in a catastrophic display of ignorance, chose a different path. He translated preserve the legacy as Tanaka-sen no Aisen o shoyusuru. The Japanese verb shoyusuru doesn't mean to steward or preserve. It means to possess, to own, to take possession of, as one would a piece of property. It's a cold, legalistic, and incredibly arrogant word to use in this context. To make matters infinitely worse, he used a grammatical structure that implied that Whitman Imports saw the Tanaka legacy as something static, an asset to be acquired and managed, rather than a living tradition to be honored. The translation landed in the silent room with the force of a slap. It was the linguistic equivalent of walking into a sacred temple and declaring you were going to buy it and turn it into a condominium. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The atmosphere in the room didn't just get cold, it froze. It was as if all the oxygen had been sucked out. Mr. Tanaka's face, which had been neutral and polite, hardened into a mask of granite. His eyes, moments before focused and attentive, became glacial. The two executives beside him exchanged a single, sharp glance that was loaded with meaning. One of them subtly drew his notepad closer, as if to shield himself. The serene Mrs. Tanaka's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly, the only sign of her shock. My father and Leo, oblivious, smiled, thinking their powerful message had been delivered. They saw only silence, not the roaring inferno of offense that had just been ignited. My own heart was hammering against my ribs. I felt a wave of nausea. He just told them we're here to take their soul, I thought, a sense of panic rising in my throat. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. 10, 15, 20 seconds of absolute, crushing stillness. Finally, Mr. Tanaka spoke. His voice was dangerously soft, a quiet hiss that was more menacing than any shout. He said a few short, clipped sentences in Japanese. Mr. Peterson, still blissfully unaware of the chasm he had opened, translated back for my father and brother. Mr. Tanaka says, he finds your terms surprising. Peterson delivered the line with a slight shrug, as if this were just a standard piece of negotiating pushback. He says he must reconsider if your view of partnership is so divergent from his own. Peterson's translation was, once again, a pale shadow of the reality. The word Mr. Tanaka had used wasn't surprising. It was keko, a word that can mean splendid or fine, but when used in this context with his tone, was a deeply dismissive and final absolutely not. He hadn't said their views were divergent. He'd implied they were fundamentally insulting. Leo, finally sensing that the ship was sinking, started to look panicked. His face lost its color. He glanced at our father, a desperate, questioning look in his eyes. What does he mean, surprising? He whispered across the table. Arthur looked back, equally confused and starting to flush with anger, mistaking the offense he had caused for a hardball negotiation tactic. Tell him the terms are standard, my father instructed Peterson, his voice tight. They were completely, utterly lost. The deal of a lifetime, the future of our company, was collapsing in real time, and they had no idea why. They were pilots flying blind in a storm, and their navigator had just read the map upside down. My hands were shaking. I saw decades of my family's work, my grandfather's legacy, about to be incinerated by pride and ignorance. And in that moment of pure terror, I heard Keiko-san's voice in my head, as clear as if she were standing beside me. Asterisk, your voice has value only when you choose to use it. Turn the key, Noel-sen. Asterisk. My father opened his mouth to speak again, to double down, to make it worse. I knew I had 1 second to act.
It was a choice.
I could remain in my corner, the silent, dutiful daughter, and watch everything burn. Or I could step into the fire. Adrenaline surged through me, a hot, cleansing wave that washed away 20 years of fear and deference. Before another word could be spoken, I pushed my chair back. The scrape of its legs on the polished floor was an acoustic thunderclap in the silent room. I stood up. Every single head in the room snapped towards me. My father's face was a mask of pure fury, his eyes blazing. "Noel," he hissed, his voice a low, threatening growl. "Sit
Down. Now."
Leo looked at me as if I had lost my mind, his expression a mixture of panic and embarrassment. I ignored them. I kept my eyes fixed on Mr. Tanaka. I walked away from my small, insignificant table and approached the main conference table, the holy ground from which I had been barred. I placed my hands flat on the cool mahogany, grounding myself. I took a deep breath, drew myself up to my full height, and gave a formal, perfect bow to Mr. Tanaka, a bow of deep respect and apology. Then I began to speak. The Japanese that came from my lips was not the clunky, textbook language of Mr. Peterson. It was the Japanese that Keiko-san had taught me. It was flawless, fluid, and steeped in the highest level of formal, honorific Kigo. "Tanaka Shacho," I began, my voice clear and steady, betraying none of the terror I felt inside. "Mashawake gozaimasen." Asterisk CEO Tanaka, my deepest and most sincere apologies. There are no words to express my regret. Asterisk, the room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Saki hodo no tsuiko enai, judai nago kai, ga gozaimashita. There has been a grave and serious misunderstanding in the translation you just heard. I didn't even glance at Mr. Peterson, who now looked pale and horrified, finally realizing the magnitude of his error. I kept my focus entirely on the Japanese delegation. I explained, carefully and humbly, what my father had intended to say. I didn't use the word shoyusuru. Instead, I spoke of their legacy, their dento, their tradition with reverence. I used the verb yukisuru, which means to inherit a responsibility, to receive something precious and carry it forward. I talked about our profound desire to sancho suru, to respect their brand's philosophy. I explained that we saw ourselves not as owners, but as humble custodians, as a Zuccarite, trusted keepers of something sacred. I spoke of our wish to be students of their legacy, not its masters. I articulated everything my father and brother felt but were incapable of expressing, and I did it in the language of their heart, not just their tongue. I spoke for maybe 90 seconds, but in that time, I rebuilt the bridge that Mr. Peterson had dynamited. I could see the change on the faces of the Tanaka executives. The rigid posture softened. The stone-faced expressions melted from shock and offense into surprise, and then into intense, focused interest. Mr. Tanaka's hard gaze softened, his eyes now fixed on me with a look of astonishment and dawning respect. My father and Leo were frozen, mouths slightly agape, staring at me as if I were a complete stranger who had just materialized in the room. In that moment, I was not Noelle, the helpful daughter. I was not the family's convenient hobbyist. I was a professional, an expert, and the most competent person in the room, and everyone on both sides of the table now knew it. I finished my statement, held Mr. Tanaka's gaze for a moment longer, and then gave another, smaller bow. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the cold, dead silence of before. It was a silence filled with weight, reassessment, and a profound, seismic shift in power. Into that charged silence, a new voice emerged. It was soft, but it carried an undeniable authority that cut through the tension like a perfectly honed blade. It was Mrs. Tanaka. She had been silent for the entire meeting, a graceful, unreadable presence. Now, she leaned forward slightly and a warm, knowing smile spread across her face. She looked directly at me, her eyes twinkling with a light I recognized from a lifetime ago. And she spoke, not in Japanese, but in flawless, unaccented English. "Noel-san," she said, her voice filled with a warm, genuine affection that stunned the room. "It has been a long, long time. I see you finally found the courage to turn the key." My mind short-circuited. My brain struggled to connect the two images, the elegant wife of a corporate titan, Mrs. Emi Tanaka, and the kind, patient mentor from my youth in Kyoto, Mrs. Keiko Sato. The face, the voice, the phrase, "turn the key." It was her. It was really her. The world tilted on its axis. Keiko-san. Here. All this time. She had married Kenji Tanaka a few years after I had known her, taking his family name. The possibility was so remote, I had never even considered it. A gasp escaped my lips. Keiko-san. The reveal landed like a second, even more powerful bombshell. My father and Leo swiveled their heads to look at her, their expressions a comical mixture of shock and utter confusion. They had dismissed this woman, the wife, the plus one, as a silent accessory to the negotiation. They had no idea they had been sitting across from the person who held the true key to the entire relationship. Keiko, Mrs. Tanaka, addressed the entire room, her voice calm and commanding. "My husband and I were, I must admit, quite concerned by the tone of your initial communications," she said, her gaze sweeping over my father and Leo, who visibly flinched. The language was artless. However, I advised him to wait, to be patient, and see this meeting through. She turned her warm smile back to me. I remembered a brilliant and passionate young student of language I once knew in Kyoto, a girl named Noelle Whitman. I wondered if she was, by some chance, still a part of this company. I told my husband that if that girl was still here, the heart of this company was in the right place, even if its voice was clumsy. "It seems," she concluded, her eyes shining with pride, "my faith was well placed." For the first time all day, a genuine smile broke across Mr. Kenji Tanaka's face. He looked at his wife with deep affection, then back at me. He bypassed my father, my brother, and the now wilting Mr. Peterson completely. He spoke directly to me, in rapid, complex Japanese, asking a pointed question not about the contract, but about my personal vision for how the Tanaka brand's spirit could be authentically introduced to a Western audience that values directness. Without hesitation, I answered him. The fear was gone, replaced by a pure, exhilarating flow of confidence. I spoke about finding the intersection of Japanese subtlety and American enthusiasm, weaving in the cultural insights from the briefing documents my family had ignored. I was no longer the note-taker in the corner. I had, in the space of 5 minutes, become the lead negotiator. Mr. Tanaka nodded slowly, thoughtfully, then spoke to his wife in a low voice. She nodded, then turned to my father. "My husband would like to suggest we take a brief recess. And I," she said, her eyes on me, "would like to speak with Noel-san privately for a few moments." It wasn't a request. We walked into a small, adjacent office, and the moment the door closed, Keiko's formal demeanor melted away. She embraced me warmly. "I am so proud of you," she whispered. "So very proud. I knew you had it in you. Sometimes, the world does not give you an opportunity to be heard. Sometimes," she said, pulling back to look me in the eye, "you must create it." We spoke for 10 minutes, a whirlwind of catching up on 20 years, but mostly, she just reinforced the confidence I had just discovered, telling me that my voice was the most valuable asset my family possessed. When we returned to the conference room, the atmosphere had been irrevocably altered. Mr. Peterson was gone, having slipped out in shame. My father and brother were standing by the window, speaking in hushed, panicked tones. They fell silent as we entered. Mr. Tanaka stood up. He announced, via Keiko's translation this time, that the deal could proceed, but with one non-negotiable condition. All future communications, negotiations, and strategic decisions regarding this partnership, she translated, her husband's voice firm, will be managed by and communicated through Noelle Whitman. She will be our primary liaison and the lead project manager for this merger from your side. We will communicate only through her. These are our terms. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a coronation. And it was delivered right in front of the two men who had spent my entire life telling me I wasn't worthy. The ride home in the company car was the most agonizingly silent 60 minutes of my life. My father stared out the window, his jaw clenched. Leo just looked at his hands in his lap. The sheer weight of what had happened, of their colossal misjudgment, hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. They had almost lost everything. I had saved them. There was nothing to say. Later that evening, there was a quiet knock on the door of my home office. It was Arthur and Leo. They looked awkward and defeated, like soldiers surrendering their swords. My father, a man I had never once seen admit a mistake, couldn't quite meet my eye. He cleared his throat. We need to talk. I gestured for them to come in, my expression calm and neutral. I felt strangely peaceful, detached from the need for their approval for the first time in my life. They stood in the middle of the room, my father finally looking at me. For the first time, he wasn't looking at his daughter. He was looking at the executive who held the future of his company in her hands. "We were wrong, Noelle," he said, the words sounding rusty, as if they hadn't been used in decades. "Completely and utterly wrong. We underestimated you. We were arrogant and we were blind. We almost destroyed this company today because of our pride." He finally looked me straight in the eye. "You saved us. And I am sorry." It was clumsy, forced, but in its own way, it was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. Leo's apology was more personal, his voice thick with emotion. "I was a monumental idiot, Noelle. I was so caught up in being the heir, in playing the part of the big shot VP, that I couldn't see the real expert, the real leader, was standing right next to me the whole time. I dismissed you. I belittled your skills. I'm so sorry." I listened to them, letting the silence hang in the air after they finished. The old Noelle would have immediately said, "It's okay," and rushed to smooth things over, to ease their discomfort. But the woman who had stood up in that boardroom was still with me. I was not going to make this easy for them. "Thank you," I said simply, my voice even. "I appreciate you saying that." I let them wait. Then I continued. "I will accept the role Mr. Tanaka has offered. But let's be very clear. This changes everything. This isn't a temporary assignment. I will have full, autonomous authority over the Tanaka project. And I expect a permanent executive position with a title that reflects my role, a seat on the board, and compensation commensurate with Leo's." I laid out my terms, not as a request, but as a statement of fact. This was the new reality. My boundary. They both just nodded, their faces pale. They knew they had no choice. The power had shifted, and it was never shifting back. A year later, the world looked completely different. The Whitman-Tanaka partnership was a roaring success, exceeding all our projections. I was the company's chief operating officer, a title I had earned, not been given. I spent a good portion of my time in Japan, working closely not just with Mr. Tanaka, but with my old mentor, Keiko. Our renewed friendship became a source of immense personal and professional strength, a beautiful, unexpected gift from the universe. I saw her not just as a mentor, but as the kind of family I had always craved, one built on mutual respect and genuine belief.